Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. On this video, I'm going to be talking about December, sort of the middle to late part of December, which covers the full moon in Sagittarius and also the all-important Capricorn Ingress. And so I'm going to go into all of that in detail. And then I will be taking you through all 12 signs. And again, although the focus will be this full moon, I'm also going to be looking at where other planets of significance are in the different signs, as far as the different signs are concerned, so that you get a more kind of general view of things, which I know a lot of you like. Thank you again for all your really interesting comments. I'm a very frank, outgoing kind of person, so I appreciate it when I get those frank comments, even if I don't always like them. And if you're new to my channel, then please subscribe because, of course, it helps the channel to grow. Now, another thing I want to say before I lay into all the astrology is that, and I get it. I get that I'm English, I'm British, and therefore, what point is there in my talking about American politics? I know nothing. Well, there are two things that are important here. The first thing is America is hugely important for the whole world. As I often say, what happens in America doesn't stay in America. And it's very, very important to all of us in Europe, all over the world. So having a kind of astrological eye on it, I see as a responsibility. It's one of my astrologer's responsibilities. The second thing is, obviously, I've lived in America for over 20 years on and off. So I'm very ingrained with the American philosophy, really, and I understand it well. And of course, my partner of the last 17 years is an American. So I do feel that I have quite a grounding in what's going on there. And yes, of course, I have my feelings, but I do my absolute level best to present each side and look at the astrology in as unbiased way as I can. And with Libra rising, that's my job too. So let's get into it. And I'm going to start really at the beginning. I'm going to start with the full moon. And the full moon is on the 15th of December. And I'm going to be looking at that central point. But such a lot is going on just before that I want to go over that, look at it and see if we can see any more into what is going on with these all-important alignments. My previous video, which covered the new moon in Sagittarius, did do quite a kind of good look at all the things that are happening. But life has moved apace. And goodness, what didn't we see happening in that middle to late part of November? And just to set the record straight, I'm recording this video on the 25th of November. So we know what I know at this particular point in time. But in terms of this full moon, which I want to have just a little talk about, the full moon is in Gemini, 23 degrees, 53 minutes, Sagittarius, Gemini. And it's angling Neptune at 27 of Pisces. So we've got a Neptunian aura to this full moon. And Neptune is our most kind of spiritual planet. It is the lord of the distant realms in terms of the spiritual realms. That's where we are touched by Neptune, but it's a very unsafe area, a little bit like the idea of bliss. How do we get bliss? I mean, of course, we can be in love and we're in bliss. We can have a wonderful out-of-body experience, see something beautiful, hear beautiful music, and we're in bliss. But it's not a safe place to stay for a long time. You have to come back to planet Earth because we're Earth creatures. And some of those shortcuts to Neptune land are drugs, alcohol, addictive behaviors, which give us that high. And of course, that can be very, not only self-destructive, but destructive to others. And these are the things we need to remember about Neptune. So we can look at this full moon and think, oh, it's kissed by Neptune. We have this wonderful spiritual aura to it. But we also know that Neptune is the master of chaos and confusion, deception, all those things that make us think one thing when something else is going on, both in our own lives, but also generally when we're looking out at the world and the world events that are reported to us by certain sources. We have to be very sure that source is authentic. So we need to bear this in mind when we look at this full moon with its connection to Neptune. It forms a T-square, Neptune right at the apex of it. Now, this full moon is known as the cold moon. And you know, all these full moons were given names really according to the Northern Hemisphere natives, so to speak. The indigenous peoples gave them this name. And of course, it was cold at this time in the Northern Hemisphere. But it's also got another name, which I like a lot, and that's it's called the oak moon. And the reason it was called the oak moon is because the mistletoe is abundant at this time. The berries are at their juiciest, so to speak. And of course, mistletoe, Christmas, these things go together. And here we go, looking at this full moon in reference to Christmas and mistletoe. Now, there's another thing about this full moon, and this is probably a little personal, but I've always called this full moon Sun in Sagittarius, Moon in Gemini, whether it falls in November or it falls in December. I've always called it the Christos moon. Now, in point of fact, this relates to my mentor, the late Ingrid Lind, who was a key member, or if not a founder member, of the White Eagle Lodge. And the idea of the Christ light coming through at this time was something that I kind of took to heart and thought just before Christmas, when the nights are at their darkest, the days are at their longest, the idea of the Christ light, the light radiating the darkness is very comforting and uplifting. Technically, of course, the Christos full moon is when the sun is in Gemini and the moon is in Sagittarius, and that's back in May or June. But still, it's something to think about. We're near Christmas, we're not quite there, and we see all the sparkly lights and the frosting, the dusting of frost, and it is romantic in a way, and it's uplifting if we allow it to be, even if at the times we're going through, things are really, really difficult for us. Sometimes that makes it worse, seeing something beautiful and seeing everyone else feeling very celebratory. But nevertheless, it is a replica of the sparkle, the dust, the magic, the spirituality of the season. So that's something I like to think about in particular at this full moon. So where do I want to go from here? Yes, what I'm going to do is actually look at the chart for this full moon in Gemini, but I'm going to be talking about the run-up to this period and the important kind of configurations there are, because there are a lot of them. So let's have a look at this picture. Now, as you see, I have set this from the perspective of Kiev. And Kiev is such an important place in the world at the moment. Certainly at the time that I'm recording this, Putin has sent an experimental hypersonic missile into Dnipro, and it's quite a threatening situation. The sabers are rattling, and it's got everybody on tenterhooks. We're not quite sure what will happen next. Could it be really a desperately difficult situation? Could we be coming nearer to some kind of global conflict, or is it possibly going to all settle down, and somehow out of this very difficult period we get on the road to some kind of peace negotiations? I have to say that I think all this is possible. The astrology is very illustrative of what I'm talking about. But if we look at this chart, we will see the sun right up there in the 10th house, the moon in the opposite house, the 4th house. And you can see I've drawn it out. We've got Neptune in the middle. So we've got this square to Neptune from the sun and moon, causing this T-square. In regard to Kiev and Ukraine, it does give us a bit of a snapshot of the story of this full moon. And what I really, really like about this story is the Jupiter position on the IC in the 4th house and the moon in the 4th house. We've got this idea of the homeland being in the 4th house and protected. And I really, really like this. There's some good emanations coming off this full moon chart. Of course, we can also see that dominant Mars-Pluto opposition. We see Mars in the 4 o'clock position. We see Pluto coming up to the 10 o'clock position, hooked up with Venus there, that big, strong opposition. This is showing us the confrontation, the conflict, the cross purposes, the strong oppositions, the polarities, the divisions in life and between nations. And that's playing into these events as well. And this is giving us a snapshot of it around the time of the full moon. But if we go back to this period, what I'm thinking of is actually uploading this particular video probably at the time of the new moon. And 7 days after that new moon, that whole week, we're seeing some very important applying configurations. We're going to see the Sun and Mercury squaring Saturn. They're going to be forming a T-square, the Sun and Mercury opposing Jupiter squaring Saturn. Venus is going to be heading into Aquarius and conjoining Pluto. And Neptune is going to be turning stationary, retrograde. And of course, at this particular time, in the early part of December, Mercury is retrograde. So we've got a lot of things going on in this 7-day period as December kicks off, which are very, very precarious indeed. And I suspect throughout that period, we're going to be hearing some things we don't like very much. We're going to see great instability, and it's going to worry us. But what we have to keep hoping for is that with Jupiter's position in these configurations, Jupiter is always the bringer of joy. Yes, it can inflate and situations can escalate, but I like to see Jupiter's participation in these as showing that there is a way forward. There is a guiding light. There is a protective factor going on in all these rather difficult influences. So what I also want you to see, and I've ringed this round, is Saturn in Pisces at, well, in this particular picture, I've got it at 13 of Pisces, and that's in the 8 o'clock position in this horoscope. It's actually squaring Jupiter down at the sort of 5 o'clock position. Here we've got it at 15 of Gemini. By the time we get to Christmas Eve, the 24th of December, Jupiter and Saturn are going to be in alignment. They're going to be 90 degrees away from each other. Now, I have got a whole separate video on the Jupiter-Saturn square, which if you haven't taken a look at yet, can I urge you to do so, because it really gives an in-depth look at what these two planets mean when they are in this particular aspect, or whenever Jupiter and Saturn are conjoined, opposed, or squared. Think of them as two separate principles being aligned. So they're trying to speak at the same time. They're trying to be heard at the same time. They're making a combined effort here, although you can hear each voice clearly. And why this is important, this Jupiter-Saturn square, the first time that in this cycle, in Pisces and Gemini, the first time they became in square was on August the 19th this year. And if you remember, August the 19th was a very, very big day in the astrological calendar. Another full moon this time 27 Aquarius Leo. And that played into so many countries' charts, Ukraine, Russia, America, the charts of Kamala, the charts of Trump. And, that wasn't too far away from the election, which happened on November the 5th. So you can see really an importance in terms of constitutions, in terms of big things happening in countries, to governments, to royalty, even to leadership, to those things that represent in a nation the ring past not, the things that keep everything in place. And the fact that they're in square means that issues related to what I've just mentioned, leadership, actually finance, the economy, government, all of that is at a crucial state. And as you know, certainly when we look at France, we look at Lithuania, we look at Germany, we look at all these countries. There are many more of them, and I can't necessarily recall them all. They're all in a great state of volatility with their elections, and their extremes to the right, extremes to the left, largely as a reflection of the fact that every nation is pretty fed up as far as the people go with the cost of living and everything else. Surely someone's got to do better than the lot we've got in. Let's change it. That's the impulse that we're certainly seeing. But when it comes to your individual charts and your individual life, especially if this Jupiter-Saturn square connects with something in your natal chart, or you were born with a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, a Jupiter-Saturn opposition, or a Jupiter-Saturn square, or I guess, Jupiter and Saturn on the angles. If these two planets are really, really important and prominently angled in your chart, then you're going to respond to this Jupiter-Saturn square a little bit more than someone who perhaps doesn't have these planets as any priority in their natal chart. But one of the things I really notice about these two together is that while Jupiter presents golden opportunities, fabulous vistas, this is where you're going towards. Look at those horizons. Aren't they fabulous? These can be yours. And you get all excited and think, oh, this is wonderful. Look what I'm looking at. How great this can be. Like Saturn's in there saying, just a minute, have you got a passport? Have you done the work? Have you got a qualification? And guess what? The weather's going to be bad. So in other words, Saturn puts in the obstacles to you acquiring what you see in these great vistas. But let's not forget, that's for good purpose, because if we just got everything we wanted the minute we saw it, we wouldn't value it. And Saturn teaches us about values, and we wouldn't really have the wherewithal to manage it because we haven't done the work. So that is a very, very good way to look at this Jupiter-Saturn square in terms of your own life and your own natal chart, and then we can widen it or broaden it a little bit more when we come to looking at the world and different countries and see those same principles alive and well, but on a massive scale. This time, Jupiter is in retrograde, so Jupiter is going back towards Saturn. But the third time, Jupiter and Saturn will be in square to each other. And I should really look up this. I don't want to get this wrong. Where have I put this? I know it's in June next year, and I did write the date down somewhere. It might be June the 9th, something like that. But anyway, I will refer to it again. But the last time that they are in square will be in June of next year. And that's sort of almost always the more powerful event. The events are more powerful. They bring a conclusion to whatever this Jupiter-Saturn cycle has been all about. And it is very important constitutionally. So I think we'll see all sorts of important constitutional developments in many countries, whether it's Russia, whether it's Great Britain, whether it's France, whether it's America, whether it's Germany. It isn't just one single place. This theme is all-embracing. It's global. And the idea of constitutions being reshaped in some degree, although that's really Pluto's job, but it's sort of affirming the Constitution. And therefore, if it can't be affirmed, it needs to be changed. Okay, that's where we're going with that particular one. So just to remember that before we come into this full moon, that first week of December, we've got all those big alignments forming. Pluto went into Aquarius on the 19th of November, and it's beginning its very long 20-year transit of Aquarius. And Venus will conjoin Pluto. So in this way, this is the first personal planet, if you like, to conjoin Pluto. So we're going to get some kind of experience again. What is Pluto in Aquarius teaching us? What is it all about? What is this entry into the new age of Aquarius all about? Is it great and glorious and uplifting and all those things that people talk about? Or is it going to be a really, really rough opening, a baptism of fire, so to speak, and we've got all sorts of difficult issues to deal with? And certainly, as I have said, I think a couple of times in my Friday Bite, we stand at a precipice. The world is on a precipice. And it's how we respond at this point. And we all have individual decisions to make, and we may be individually at a precipice. We've got something going on in our lives. If we do this, that happens. If we do the other happens. And a full moon is very good at bringing us to crossroads. So we see it individually and we see it globally. But as I look at this chart, and this is the full moon from Keve's perspective, we see that Jupiter quite close. It's moving towards the moon. It's on that key point, and I love that protective influence. And I wouldn't rule some kind of breakthrough, or at least signs that this can come about in the future with this kind of setup. So let me move on, look at my list, see what else I've got. Yes, okay, so we reach the full moon, which is on the 15th of December. It is in square to Neptune, and I have touched on that briefly, the idea of chaos and confusion on the one hand, and very high-mindedness and high spirituality on the other. And of course, it is the season for that, where lots of carol concerts and lots of occasions where people are gathering in cathedrals and churches and sort of feeling that sense of uplift. Can you have upliftment? Hope you can, because it kind of does the job, doesn't it? Because of that Christmassy feel. And that is really stamped in this horoscope. But don't be surprised if everything is at 6s and 7s at the same time, whether we've got all sorts of weather in different parts of the world disrupting life and the normal running of life, or whether we've got events happening that also disrupt our lives. And one of the things I think we have to be very, very aware of, certainly when we have any big Uranus aspects, or when Uranus is strongly featured in a chart, is this whole idea of the interruption of internet service and all sorts of problems with communications due to the undersea cables being cut. Now, we already know this happened in November. I think it was November the 17th, possibly, where they were cut in the Baltic Sea. One near Denmark and the other a little bit more near the German coast, and obviously deliberate. And there are many more. We don't get them always revealed to us in the news, but it's a bit of a pattern now, and it's a kind of cyber warfare. So I really do think that we need to keep our eyes on this. And I remember quite a while back, and we're talking about August, the August full moon, August 19th, I did talk about a rupture underneath on the Earth's surface, quite near the surface of the Earth, but undersea, and maybe more towards Japan. So it isn't necessarily just sabotage that may interfere with our communications. It could be Mother Nature. So I'm not ruling all of that out at this time as well. And it's certainly something we should keep our eyes out for. And again, just to be practical, you guys, yeah, we use our phones for everything. And I'm always on my computer every day. Back up your files, have other systems of notes, passwords. So nothing is dependent on a gadget that requires the internet or that kind of software to run. Make yourself independent of all that software stuff. And that's going to help us through this delicate period when cyber warfare is certainly going to be more and more frequent. Now, yes, so the Sun-Neptune square itself, although the full moon is squaring Neptune, we don't get that square until the 18th of December. That's its most exact point, but of course 8 days before, 8 days after, we're in the ballpark. So watch your step, and maybe that's quite literal. Things can get very slippery and foggy and misty and murky with Neptune. And certainly if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, this is the season of fog and the season of snow, ice, and all sorts of slippery, sludgy things. So keep your balance. Well, maybe that's the advice, keep your balance, because that then will apply to all sorts of judgments you may be making, all sorts of situations that are coming up, and you think, what is that? And you'll go off in some direction which is not helpful. So we need to keep our balance at all times. Now, another very, very important feature of this period that I'm covering is the sun's entry into Capricorn. Now, there are 4 points in the year, 4 ingress points. They happen when the sun enters Aries in March, when the sun enters Cancer in June, when the sun enters Capricorn in December, and I've just about forgotten Libra there, when the sun enters Libra in September. So these 4 cardinal points, 0 degrees, Aries, Libra, Cancer, Capricorn, are the 4 points of the year where we set up charts, we astrologers, who are interested in mundane astrology, and we have a look at what the next quarter, the next 3 months look like. And you can set it for where you are, whichever country you're looking at. I mean, if I was going to look at Australia now, I'd be setting the moment the sun entered 0 degrees, 0 minutes of Capricorn, I'd be setting it from Sydney, although in a way Canberra is the capital, isn't it, of Australia. So maybe Canberra is the right place to set it. But wherever it is, that then gives you a picture of what's happening within the country during the next 3 months. So I have done this this time. And in fact, I set it up for 3 different places, because as soon as I've done one, I thought, oh, that looks very interesting. So let's look at another. And I'm going to start with my home country, first of all. So I set this Capricorn Ingress chart from the perspective of London. And I find it interesting. And I think you know what I find interesting. We're going to go to that 5 o'clock position, and we're going to see Uranus up close and personal on the IC. That's a very dominant Uranus. And remember what I was saying earlier about Uranus, how important that is. The Uranus effect comes alive if you've got Uranus on an angle or a very close aspect to the personal planets from Uranus. This is the area, the 4th house of the homeland. Uranus in the homeland suggests disruption in the homeland. Does this mean protests? Does this mean upsets? Does it mean some kind of attack on the homeland? We could put all those things in the mix and say all of them are possible. But we've got to remember that the IC is also opposing the midheaven. And the midheaven is the government, is where we look to get ideas about leading figures and leaders per se, prime ministers, presidents, that kind of thing. So Uranus is opposing that point and saying, is something going to change within the leadership of the country? Well, at this point, it's very difficult to imagine that Sir Keir is going to exit stage left, and we're certainly not having an election. It's none of that. But yet there is an inkling here that there is instability within the government, and we've got to wait and see how that unravels in terms of where we're looking at this perspective, London, and this Ingress chart for London. I also want to draw your attention to the configuration we can see. The moon exactly opposition Saturn squaring Jupiter. So we've got the Jupiter-Saturn angle brought out this time by the moon, creating a configuration. And that's really important. If we break it down, if we look at moon and Saturn, that's really depressive conditions. The moon and Saturn are widow's weaves. We feel very negative on a moon Saturn aspect. The country feels dark. Why does the country feel dark? Maybe because it is dark. Maybe we've had a lot of power cuts. Or maybe it's dark because of events. And because Jupiter is in the mix, we also get this feeling that if at this time there is the loss of a leader or a leading figure, someone we look up to, then we are going to be sad about it. So although this chart covers the 3 months from December the 21st, we might want to look particularly at this period to see what may transpire. Although, remember, there are 3 months to go. Also important in this, we've got the Mars-Pluto opposition across the 1st, 7th axis. So we are certainly at war with our partners. There's a lot of upset and argy-bargy going on. But so what? Is that new? No, it's always happening. Although, Mars is retrograde and we've got all these other important alignments taking place. So maybe a little bit more serious than that. And maybe there is this aura of confrontation in the bigger sense that is within this Ingress chart. Now, if we come to the second Ingress chart that I'm going to look at, I'm going to be looking this time at Moscow. Now, for Moscow, you see, as soon as the sun goes into Capricorn, 0 degrees, Capricorn, 0 minutes, everything is like frozen at that moment, which is why nothing in the planetary arrangement changes at all. We've still got that very close moon-Saturn opposition squaring Jupiter. That hasn't changed at all. But we're seeing it from Moscow's perspective. And here we have the sun right up at the top of the chart. So, this is an Ingress chart. This is all to do with the government, to do with the leader of the government. Now, the sun is actually squaring Neptune in this case. Neptune we can see rising to that 9 o'clock position, sun square Neptune. So it says here, and looks as though Putin is in a quagmire at this point, or the government is at sea. These are all really good words to use with Neptune. We get this snapshot of this full moon squaring Jupiter. And we can see from this perspective that this isn't a good place for Moscow to be in at this particular time. And I think any time you've got Neptune on the angles, whether it's on the ascendant, the descendant, the midheaven, or the IC, you've got real structural issues, the things that bring structure to a country. Sometimes real structure, we're talking about buildings, but more often than not, we're thinking about governments and rules and the things that hold the country together. So there's a lot of loss and a loss of face here as well. However, when I was looking at this chart initially, I thought to myself, it looks to me like this is an empowered Russia, that dominant sun on the midheaven coming into at the point of ingress, the Jupiter to the moon Saturn. Yeah, there is a tremendous loss of life going on with Russia, as you know. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers have lost their lives. It's terrible. Their financial situation is in an absolute pickle. What else can I say? But in terms of national consciousness or government consciousness, it's bullish. So the kind of what I came up with when I looked at this chart was this is an empowered Russia but they are going to be hoisted by their own petard, and that is very much reflected by the Neptune rising and the Moon-Saturn-Jupiter combination that we see in this chart. Well, of course, I couldn't go really very far without looking at America and Washington, could I? So here we have the Ingress chart according to Washington. Now, this is really important for America because at this point in time, 25th of November, I, like everybody else, is expecting President Trump to be, I nearly said ordained, inaugurated on the 21st of January. That's the way things are heading. Right, this time he's forming his government, all of that kind of stuff. So that's the plan at this particular point. That's what we can see happening. And maybe that will indeed be the case. But what I want to point to is that Uranus, where we've got Uranus now, it's no longer on the IC as it is in terms of Great Britain and the homeland. We've got Uranus in the 7th house, and this is all about partners. This is all about America's relationship with other countries, other nations. So it's very rocky. It's very, very rocky indeed. And we've also got that Mars-Pluto opposition, and guess where that is? It's on the 3rd, 9th axis, Mars being in the area of foreign affairs, of far horizons, international events. So we know that international events are playing into the life of America in a very explosive way. But again, let's remember, we've got 3 months from this point. It doesn't all have to happen on the 21st of December. We've got 3 months for this plan to unfold. But guess what? Here we have the moon opposing Saturn, squaring Jupiter, going from the 10th to the 4th to the 8th. And this to me says it's the end of a regime. Now, that speaks volumes, doesn't it? I mean, we know that the Biden regime is set to end on the 21st of January. So this is what we may be seeing symbolized in this chart. But also there is this sadness, this sense of a death. So is there some event during the course of this 3 months, and maybe before the inauguration date, that there is some very important death? And that also plunges America into grief and loss mode. Remember, that's a pattern for everybody, because this Ingress chart captures that moment when the moon is exactly opposition Saturn. And I have to say, because it's the moon, we could be looking at a female rather than a male, although it could be the death of a female movement, things like that, the death of something. It doesn't necessarily have to be a figurehead, but often in the 10th house, it is a figurehead, and I would say it's a female, and that goes for all the charts that I've been looking at. So these are the sorts of things we need to bear in mind. And while I'm on this chart, because I've drawn this out so that you can see it, you can see how Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus are in this little mini grand trine here, this little configuration, which I've talked about a lot. And it is a sort of emblem of the nuclear age. And that's why there's so much going on with concerns about nuclear power and nuclear weapons at this time. It's because these 3 planets discovered after Saturn, so we're talking from 1781, they've all lent their names to elements, plutonium, neptunium, and uranium. That's why I call this a little nuclear mini grand trine. And when we get configurations that bounce off on this, we get those surges of events. Putin constantly rattling the nuclear saber, as he does often when the moon or something is picking up this little trio. That's all it is. Doesn't necessarily mean we're heading to nuclear war at all. It just means it's triggering, it's resonating with those principles. So I'm going to come back to me, and from this point on, let's have a look at sign by sign what we're actually getting into. So before I start, I'm going to start with Sagittarius. I just want to remind those of you who may be new to my channel, I'm looking at this from the perspective of sun signs, first and foremost. So if you're an Aries, you're going to be looking at my Aries interpretation of what's going on. And if you're a Taurus, you're going to be looking at the Taurus one. But if you know that you have Taurus rising or Leo rising or Virgo, whatever it is, you can also look at that interpretation as well, because it will be valid, more valid in a way. But you'll need to know exactly what degree you have of Sagittarius rising or Capricorn rising to make sure that we've got the full moon in the right place and the Jupiter-Saturn square and all those other things. Okay, so let's start at the beginning, and let's start with Sagittarius. Happy birthday, Sagittarians. And when we look at what's going on here in your solar chart, we see obviously the sun in your sign, because this is the season of Sagittarius. And we see the moon in the opposite house, and we call this the relationship axis. So there's a lot going on with relationships, not necessarily romantic relationships or marital relationships. They can be business relationships, relationships with companies, relationships with friends. So this is an important period, really, around the time of the full moon, for really cementing a relationship. So if you're listening to me and you're a sun Sag, or you've got Sag rising and you're looking at this full moon and you've got a date set for a wedding, you're doing it at the perfect time. When we look at full moons, we're looking at closure and completion. And because it's on the relationship axis, we're looking at the completion of, that you are now one. You are a union. And Jupiter is not too far from the moon. So we've got this Jupiter blessing with there. It's expanding the principles here. So we could look at this and see this as a very nice portent of happy days to come. But there's always a sting in the tail, isn't there? And we're looking at that Neptune. We're looking at Neptune intersecting that, which is saying what you're seeing isn't all there is. So if you're signing a contract at this time, you're signing up to something at this time, bear in mind there's something you can't see. It may be worth checking the small print, so don't be afraid to say, before I sign on the dotted line, can I see all the clauses here? That might save you money. It might save you from getting into something you really shouldn't get into. And I think also, if all your warning signals are going off, your radar is saying, there's something I'm not comfortable with, there's something, I'm not sure about this, then don't do it. My great kind of piece of advice with anything, particularly in regard to Neptune, is if you don't know what to do, do nothing. Wait until you do. But at least if you can't get out of an arrangement, or you've got something that you must put your name to, go through every small little detail before you put your signature on that piece of paper. Now, we also get the reverse here as well. The idea of closure and completion can mean it's the end. You've come to the end of a contract. You've come to the end of a relationship. It's not going to go any further. And perhaps with Neptune involved, it's all a bit strange. How come this all drizzled apart? What happened? Whose fault was it? What was that event? Who says this? Who says that? So there is some confusion involved in an ending. It isn't a straightforward ending. Now, maybe this gives you the possibility to come back together again at some other point, or at least to come back together to end it better. But if things are mysteriously over, and remember, this full moon goes on for another 2 weeks. The waning cycle goes on for 2 weeks. So it isn't necessarily just on Sunday the 15th. It can be the next 14 days. Remember that with Neptune in the mix and Mercury turning stationary at that same point, there is room for change. There is room for a rethink. Now, I've also put the Jupiter-Saturn alignment in here as well. Jupiter being your ruling planet, slightly more important. Saturn in the fourth house. This says this is a particularly good time to make an agreement regarding a home, whether you're going to rent a home and sign up to it for 6 months or a year or whatever, purchase a home, or do something that is attached to the family. Remember that fourth house is about home and family. And I think agreements that you make at this time or things that are going on, they need a reference to the family. Is the family happy about this? You know, is it going to fit in with the family? And those might be good questions for you to ask yourself, just because of the configuration we have here. And of course, last but not least, because of the Saturn-Jupiter, this is a very, very good time to strike up agreements, especially, I talk about the Constitution. Well, what is the Constitution? It's the rules by which we live, and we all have our own personal constitution. So this is also a time to really look at that and perhaps review it and revise it, okay? So let's move on to Capricorn. Now, this full moon is taking place in the 12th, on the 12th-6 axis. So as I'm speaking to you, the sun is moving through the 12th house. And this is a very strange period of the year. Whenever we have the sun moving through our 12th house, it's kind of strange. We're sort of left out of the loop a bit. We're not quite sure if we're doing the right thing. We're not quite sure what that person is thinking about us. We're not quite sure what that situation means. Or we could be completely oblivious of something going on that really and truly we need to be aware of. So that's all the time the sun is moving through the 12th house. But it's also a time of replenishment, and we should think about recharging our physical, mental, and spiritual batteries, taking a little bit more rest, not kind of overdoing it, in order to maximize the refreshment of our health, our immune system, but also because our unconscious mind needs refreshing. We need to do a lot of housekeeping when the sun is in the 12th house. And that means that the psyche is clearing things out it doesn't need and throwing them up, getting rid of it. And there it is in a dream. Oh, what was that? Well, it's a bit of housekeeping going on and you need to look at it, get rid of it. It's a world of nuance when the sun is in the 12th house. You really have to pick up signals and think, what's going on behind the words I'm hearing? What's going on behind, that gesture? Look behind, because that's where the important information is coming from. So we reach this full moon, and things always come to a head on a full moon. So mysteries reach their peak. There's a sense that if you haven't been terribly well, you're going to feel at your worst on a full moon. Or if you've been worried about something, you're going to feel at your most worried at this full moon. But of course, as soon as something reaches a crisis, it's at a point where it can be resolved. So if something reaches crisis point, see it as a positive thing so that you can get around to sorting it, to resolving it. And of course, that moon is close to Jupiter, and it will have been conjunct Jupiter earlier, a few hours earlier. And so this really does add a benign, all's well that ends well feel to this full moon. And also a sense that whatever happens around this time, something good is going to come out of it. Now, I've also drawn in the Saturn-Jupiter link for you. And this is important because Saturn is your ruling planet. So anything that goes on with Saturn is always part and parcel of your life story. And so this is a very good time to get things sorted. So especially paperwork, especially the rules, the plans, putting it all into a form where, it's structured. And I talked about the Constitution. when I talked about Jupiter and Saturn, why they're so important, the cycle to us in astrology. It is because they're constitutional, and we can all think about our own constitution. Well, we think of our own constitution in terms of health and well-being, don't we? But it's also the sort of rules that we live our life by. And so this is a good time to look and see how they're working and to revise them in some particular way. And before I leave you, Capricorn, I want to also note that importance of Neptune coming in between the full moon, which shows an element of chaos and confusion in the mix. So whatever's going on, let's take for an example, you're feeling a little run down. It might be quite a mystery getting to the bottom of why you feel run down. If something happens, it might not be immediately obvious why that happened. You're going to have to really dig and delve before you find a reason. Remember, Neptune is fog, can't quite see it. But otherwise, let me leave you on a good note and think about that lovely Jupiter, close to the moon, very protective. So Aquarius, on to you. And this full moon for you is on the axis of creativity and collaboration. In fact, the sun will have been moving through the 11th house since about the 22nd of November. It'll leave, obviously, on the 21st of December when we get that Capricorn Ingress. But during the time that the sun moves through the 11th house, all things to do with working as a team is very important. Team spirit. And also the priorities of the group as opposed to the individual. And we all know how difficult that can be sometimes when we're working in groups to think, okay, the group mind is this, even if my mind says something different, I got to go along with the group. So there's going to be some issues over group endeavors, whether they're social endeavors, whether they're work endeavors, whether you belong to some kind of organization, a charity, a particular spiritual group, or even a creative writing group, whatever it may be, then there's some sorting and sifting to be done here at the time of the full moon. What I like about a full moon on the 5th, 11th axis is that it can bring a creative endeavor to a close. And we have to be creative with our creativity here. We can be creative with writing, we can be creative with art, we can be creative with dance, we can be creative in the kitchen, we can be creative with finances. 100 million ways we can express our creativity. But whatever it is, it's finished. It's a done thing, and we can move on after it. But also, this particular axis is about creativity as well. So if you're expecting a baby, or perhaps someone in the family is expecting a baby, or a close friend, or even one of your children expecting a baby, then this is really relative to that. It's almost like a gestation period is over, and we are looking forward now to the birth. And that might also be a kind of metaphor for if there have been anxieties over a pregnancy or concerns about something around the pregnancy, then the fact that this full moon is conjunct Jupiter says, okay, we're all done, let's go forward from this point. Now, I know there's the elephant in the living room here, and the elephant is Neptune-shaped because Neptune comes in the middle of that sun-moon opposition. And when we think about Neptune, kind of raising our spiritual levels and letting us plug into the spiritual side of things, that's all wonderful. And that full moon is saying, listen, go sing in a cathedral, join a choir, celebrate the spirit of Christmas. It's perfect. But at the same time, Neptune can be very illusory. You could get betrayed, even if you thought the situation was this way, and no, it's that way. So there is some element of confusion and deception in the mix at the time of this full moon, and perhaps a little bit afterwards as well. So just be aware of that. You don't have to let it spoil the good things that are happening in your life, but it's something to consider so that you don't step in a puddle and find out it's a sinkhole. Okay, that's what you don't want to do. The Saturn-Jupiter square, which I've highlighted here, going from the 2nd to the 5th, this is an area of finance where Saturn is at the moment. So perhaps for the last 18 months, there's been a lot of serious things happening to finances. Maybe you're taking on more responsibility, more financial responsibility, or maybe there have been lean times. But in light of what Saturn and Jupiter are doing, remember I said how great those horizons look, how great those opportunities are, how fantastic they are. Yet Saturn is saying the road to achieving those fantastic opportunities, fulfilling them, is very stony indeed. You've got to put in the work. And I think I've said pretty well to every side this idea of it being such a constitutional combination, Saturn and Jupiter, and that we all have a constitution. That's our health and well-being, but also the rules by which we live our lives. And they may need revision at this particular point in time. Pisces, Sun Pisces, Pisces rising. Now, this full moon for you, we can see the sun up there in the 10th house and the moon in the 4th house. And of course, we can see Saturn and Neptune in the 1st house. And these are all the angular houses. To have things going on in your life when planets, the personal planets and others, are in angular houses means they're much more in your face. Things are really happening. And if we look at the sun's passage through the 10th house, which has been going on since the 21st of November, 21st, 22nd of November, and will go on until the 21st of December and the entry of the sun into Capricorn, all 10th house matters are relevant. And that has a lot to do with where you're headed in life. And so often when we think about that, especially when we're younger, that question, what are you going to be when you grow up? Well, that's the 10th house. Oh, guess what? I'm going to be this, that, and the other. And then as we get older, that tends to pan out into the sense of what we do for a living. That is our career. But of course, as we reach retirement and we don't have a job to go to anymore, the 10th house is still there. So what does it mean? Well, it means that we have goals and aspirations. We never stop, and we should never stop having goals and aspirations, things that we want to achieve and do, whatever they are. And also we have a role in life, whether that role is a parent or whether it's a spouse, whatever it may be. So the 10th house is about that as well. So as the sun moves through this area, all those things related to where we want to go in life and where we are in terms of our worldly aspirations is all in vogue. So it becomes a time when perhaps there's a lot of conversations about the future, about are you still going to be working in this place? Are you still going to be doing this same job? When we come to the full moon, remember the moon is at the opposite point where the home is. We've got this feeling that maybe you haven't considered the family's opinions. So whatever you're thinking in terms of doing and being, has it got family approval? Will it fit in with the family? And that may be what this full moon is all about. And it may also be about work-life balance. Is it balanced? Is too much attention focused on your career and not enough on home and family? Or is too much being spent, too much time and focus on home and family, and your career is suffering as a result? So this full moon may really bring this to light. And of course, all through this time, we've got the sun moving through the 10th house. We've got Jupiter in the 4th house. So there's some good stuff here as well, in the sense this is a very good time to expand the home, to add to it, whether you do so by building an extra veranda on there or an extra, we're making the home bigger, or whether you're making the home bigger because there's more people coming into the family. And remember, this full moon is close to Jupiter, so there is this sense of expansion and protection, which I really love. I've talked about that. But of course, this full moon is squared by Neptune, and Neptune is your ruling planet. So what does this say? Does it say that the conflicts that arise at this time are to do with what your personal aspirations, hopes, and beliefs are? The events of the time, the way the cookies have crumbled is it in line with your hopes and dreams and the visions you'd have for you personally? This may be the crisis. And of course, it's up to you to resolve the crisis. Is it not what you wanted it to be, but hey, guess what? I think I can handle it. Or is it, what? This is not what I want. I'm out. So that may be where you're headed. But let's not forget that Neptune can be very mysterious, and it can be very full of illusion, delusion. And you may not be seeing the situation for what it is. There may be too much feeling involved. But I do like Neptune's involvement in the full moon because of Christmas. It is around this time, and spirits should be uplifted. And let's hope that's the way you feel around this full moon time. But if instead you feel a little bit devastated by what's going on, remember, tomorrow is another day. This gets me through a lot of dark days, Pisces. And remember, who's that wonderful captain? Oh, I don't know, he walked in his home, raised all this money for the National Health Service. His quote was, "Tomorrow is going to be a good day." And that philosophy is amazingly positive. Let's also look at this Saturn-Jupiter square for you. Really important because Saturn is in your sign. So you are taking on the mantle of responsibility. It's your responsibility to sort things. And when we think about the Constitution, it's your Constitution, health and well-being, but it's also the rules by which you, and in this case, because Jupiter's in the 4th house, and your family live. So there is a sense of things being possible here, lots of future possibilities looking exciting, yet the way to get them and to have them in reality is going to be very hard work, a lot of serious obstacles. Aries. So this full moon for you, and during the time between the 22nd, 21st of November and the 21st of December, the sun is moving through the 9th house of far horizons. That is one of my favorite areas of the whole horoscope. And as you know, I'm an Aries. And I like it because I love travel and I love looking at the bigger picture. I'm very interested in arcane things, in knowledge and education and the expansion of consciousness. That's all good old 9th house stuff. Don't so much like all the legal aspects of the 9th house. But of course, it is part and parcel. Justice, legal matters, they're all in there as well. So the full moon is going to settle something for you. And perhaps it is indeed a lawsuit. Maybe that is what's going to be settled. On the other hand, you may decide on a journey or a holiday. It's done and dusted. We know where we're going. Or it may be that you are traveling, you are going, and perhaps quite some distance. And that journey is very important, either because of what happens along the way or because of what happens at your destination. This is a journey in terms of experience and knowledge. With Jupiter close to the moon, there is a sense of good things. In other words, all's well that ends well, and also a sense that you're going to get something out of this. You're going to get a lot out of your travels during this period. You're going to get a lot out of your journeys in knowledge and experience and all of that. And I think, too, when we look at this part of the horoscope, it has a lot to do with how we see where we are in the future. And the 9th house is about where do I want to be in 15 years' time? Do I want to be living here where I am, or do I want to be living in a different country? And if those are the sorts of things that come into your kind of 10-year, 20-year plan, you get a good opportunity now to look and see if you're on a trajectory towards that end. Are you in the right place? Have you got everything in place? And this full moon should be an eye-opener and an opportunity for you to say, you know what? I'm far off course right now. I've deviated from my course. What can I do to get back on it? And in a way, that Jupiter-Saturn square, we have Saturn in the 12th house, Jupiter in the 3rd house, is also about revision. It's about checking to see what you need and what's appropriate. Now, I've talked about the Constitution in terms of mundane astrology and checking that everything in the Constitution works and whether it needs revamping in some way. But we all have a Constitution aside from our health, and that's the way we lead our lives, the things that we set in stone. Does that now need a revision in light of what we know now and what's suitable for the future? That full moon, of course, is also squaring Neptune, and we can see Neptune in Pisces there. And you can see how near it is to the beginning of Aries, isn't it? So next year, Neptune's going to come right into Aries, and it's certainly going to start affecting those of you who are March born or have planets and points at 0 degrees, 1 degree, 2 degrees of Aries, or indeed of Libra, Capricorn, or Cancer. And this is a sort of preparation for it, I think. So don't be surprised if you get a sudden attack of the doubts about things. Can I do this? Am I worthy of this? What's going on? I don't feel the same about something. You know, that kind of thing could be part of this picture. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have doubts, and I'm not saying you shouldn't revise plans, but I am saying make sure that the adjustments are all valid. And of course, this whole thing with the idea of Neptune and also of Jupiter showing you great visions and opportunities and grand plans, you've got to put Saturn in there as well to make sure that those grand plans are the sort that will lead to that eventuality. Taurus, this full moon, as we can see it here, is in the 8th house of your, well, the 8th and 2nd houses of your solar chart. And if you have Taurus rising, yes, they're also in the 2nd and 8th house of your real chart. You need to know the exact degree of your ascendant, though, to be able to establish that. But here, on this particular part of the video, I'm going to be talking about this particular opposition, 2nd, 8th, and this is the financial axis of the horoscope. So for the past few weeks, really, since the 21st, 22nd of November, the sun has been moving through your 8th house. And this is a house which I call the house of the deeps. We get into very deep waters when the sun is in the 8th house. Sometimes it's almost like a synchronicity that suddenly we have to deal with things that are to do with the afterlife, or we have to sort our will out, or we have to go to a funeral, or we have to do something which reminds us that life is short. But it's a good thing, because being reminded that life is short means we make the most of it. But this house is also to do with what we receive from other people. It's the house of receivership. So we have this idea that maybe at this time you're either receiving a bonus of some description, and that often happens around the Christmas period. People get Christmas bonuses. So that may be what this is about. But it can also be inheritances, legacies, settlements. And, you know, when you put a full moon there, close to Jupiter, it looks like it's rather a big one. But at the same time, if there are any problems over settlements and inheritances, they're going to be big ones. This is not going to be small. It's going to be economy size, right? Also, if you have a financial problem, then the full moon will exacerbate that problem. Now, it may be that it's exacerbating how you feel about matters rather than necessarily making the situation worse. So you need to establish that. Is this just my imagination? Is this just me getting all bent out of shape about finances for no reason? But it may be in a few cases, and for a few Taurians or Taurus rising people, it is better to cut your losses now. To say, it's done, I can't handle this anymore, I've got to drop it. And however you interpret my words here is going to be appropriate to you, but it's also appropriate to the astrology. But let's have a look at that Neptune in the mix there. You really have to be sure that what you're seeing is real. Is it real? Is the situation as I see it real? Are the figures correct? Is the story correct? Is that person telling the truth? This is what you have to ask yourself. If at any point you think, I'm going to cut my losses, make sure you've got the whole story. Now, there's also the idea of signing contracts with a full moon, and you may want to sign up to a loan or a mortgage, for instance, something like that. And that's really appropriate on a full moon, especially one conjunct Jupiter. But please look at the small print. That's what Neptune is saying. There's a chance you've missed something. And what you don't want to do is miss something and then find out if only you'd done this at the time you signed that document, you'd be in a different position. We're also looking at that Jupiter-Saturn square. Jupiter also in the second house, and normally a second house transit of Jupiter really it increases your income and makes you feel a lot richer. And of course, sometimes we can feel richer for no reason. We just feel rich, even if there's been no change whatsoever in our income. It can be psychological as opposed to literal. But the pattern of Jupiter in the second house, and this is going to go on for another 6 months into next year, is pretty good. And we put Saturn in this mix, and it is a really, really good time to consolidate the finances, make your investments, do things that are really geared to wealth in the future, preserving things for the future. That's what this Jupiter-Saturn square for you is all about. It's also, as I've said to every sign, it's about the Constitution. And I've looked at that in my overview and talked about countries and the constitutions. This is what it's all about. So for you too, your own health and well-being constitution, the Constitution, meaning the rules by which you live your life, this aspect is important for it. And making adjustments, revising and viewing it all is really a good plan at this particular time. Gemini, well, this is the full moon in Gemini. And this takes you back to the new moon in Gemini on the 6th of June. So think about what happened around that period. Did something just happen? And it started something? It started a project of some description or a relationship, something like that. You have reached the halfway point, 6 months in. How successful has that proved? Or what have you got out of those beginnings that you made in the June period? It's very important for relationships, whether you made a decision at that time about a relationship. 6 months on, you can see how wise that decision was. Maybe, for instance, if you made a decision to get married, maybe you're getting married now. That would be a perfect expression of this full moon across the relationship axis. But it may also be that you started a relationship or made some decisions regarding a relationship in the summer, in the June time, and you've reached this point and you're thinking, this isn't working. We've come to an end. And that can be equally possible on this. But what I do like is the presence of Jupiter in the mix, because it sort of says, whatever comes to an end at this point, or whatever is finalized, reaches a conclusion, is a good thing. It's going to be good for the future. It's good for the well-being. And I really, really like that. Then, of course, as always in astrology, we get another voice in the chorus saying, just a minute, you haven't heard me yet. And in this case, that's Neptune. Neptune intersecting the full moon. The sun squaring Neptune, the moon squaring Neptune. Wonderful for all those high moments of happiness and bliss, which I talked about earlier. Then you can reach some incredible highs, but they're not sustainable. Remember that. We're just not equipped to be on that kind of high for the long term. But what is a little bit more troubling is if there's something you're not seeing, so that you make an agreement. You say you're going to do something, and then it turns out you didn't know that there was a catch, that there's a caveat here that nobody told you about. So be cautious if you're signing up to something, or that you're agreeing to go somewhere or do something. Is that going to really work? And do you see the full picture? These are the questions you need to ask yourself. And I think, too, when we look at that Jupiter-Saturn square, Saturn in the 10th house, Jupiter in the first house, this is a really good time to set down some rules by which you live. Now, you may already have them. We all do, I suppose. As soon as we become adults, really, we create some rules for ourselves, just as much as we look at the Constitution in terms of countries and having a revision of the Constitution and seeing events related to the Constitution going on at this time. Things happening to you in terms of the pillars of your life, the rules by which you lead your life. The events are happening which are forcing you to look at this and revise them if necessary. But basically, I've always liked Jupiter and Saturn as a couple. I think what you get out of them, what you work towards, is always worthwhile. Okay, Gemini. Cancer. The sun has been moving through your 6th house since the 21st, 22nd of November. And the 6th house is one of those places that everybody deep sighs about. Oh, dear, it's the house of the 6th house. What is that house? Oh, work and health. Okay, I got that. But really, it's such an important house. I mean, all the houses that come at the end of a little quadrant, whether it's the 3rd house, the 6th house, the 9th house, the 12th house, these are closing up houses. Things get done and dusted, processed, and worked through in readiness for a new beginning. And the 6th house really is where we seek our purpose in life. And as you will hear almost anyone saying, and it's certainly true in my case, and if you're an astrologer or you're a mystic or whatever you may be, the whole idea that what is your purpose here is to help other people. And the 6th house is about helping other people. And so while the sun is moving through here, you may find yourself helping other people, whether it's popping next door to see if your next door neighbor's all right, whether it's joining the community, doing a community gathering, whether you're taking care of somebody who isn't very well, or you're doing something related to other people and their care and their happiness. That's what the 6th house is there for. But of course, it is the area of work and health as well. So it's your health and well-being, the health and well-being of mind, body, and spirit. And this full moon will really put the highlight on that, will put the spotlight on that. So if you've got anything wrong with you, this full moon is going to reveal it. If there's anything you need to do, if there's something left undone, this full moon will show you what it is. And that's a good thing, because once you've seen the light, remember I talked about the Christos light of this full moon, then everything else is easy because you can see now what you have to do. So this is rather a purposeful full moon for you. It's like I've been going around in circles for a while, trying to figure out what's the right thing. And suddenly, here I am. I know what I need to do. And that's really, really good. Now, of course, let's throw Neptune in the mix. Astrology does this all the time, doesn't it? On the one hand, you've got this. On the one hand, you've got that. And it's going on all the time. And it makes decision-making as an astrologer very difficult. So Neptune comes in the middle of this and says, look, this is either going to be a really fabulous kind of experience. You're going to feel enlightened and uplifted. The decision-making you're coming to, the things that you're doing at this time are so uplifting that you feel you found your purpose in life. You feel fulfilled. That's the best side of this particular configuration. And indeed, we've got the season of celebration happening at this time, with lots of us going to carol services and nativity plays, all those things, and they make us feel very warm and wonderful. But of course, Neptune is very confusing and illusory as well. So it's quite possible that something going on at this time isn't what you think it is. So you have to do some research, and you have to be cautious in the things that you sign up to or the opinions that you give out. We can only do what we can do, Cancer. And I mean, once you've looked at all the small print, checked everything out, and you go ahead, that's the best you can do. But it's always worth remembering Neptune's got in there somewhere, and I need to keep my eyes open for potential drawbacks or somebody who isn't going to live up to their promise. Now, as regards the Saturn-Jupiter connection, we've got Saturn in the 9th house, Jupiter in the 12th. I did talk about the Constitution earlier on, and I'm talking about the constitutions of countries because that's Jupiter-Saturn in essence. The whole cycle is about that. So we have our own constitution, both in the sense of our health and well-being, but we also have it in terms of how we construct our lives. What are the things, our rules, our personal rules? And Jupiter and Saturn will throw a spotlight on that. And maybe we feel they're good and we can stand by our constitution, or whether we feel, you know what, that's not going to serve us in this particular time we're at. We need to revise that. But there's also that third part of this Jupiter-Saturn story, which is the whole idea of fabulous opportunities and possibilities, but the road to get there is full of boulders, necessary boulders, because those are the things that make us strong and make the end result lasting. Leo, this full moon for you, as you can see, is in the 5th house and the 11th house, and it falls on the axis of creativity and collaboration. But we've also got Saturn and Neptune in the 8th house of financial exchange, of intimacy, and reciprocity, really, in all its forms. So these are the 3 areas of life that are really important to you at the moment. So if we look at the sun's passage through the 5th house, through the sign of Sagittarius, it is a time when all sorts of creative matters are at a premium. And we can be creative in so many ways. Sometimes I say this to my clients and they look at me blankly and say, oh, I can't paint, I don't play an instrument, and I don't dance. But creativity is about being creative in the kitchen, being creative with finance, crafting. There can be so many things that we can be creative about. And of course, we can be procreative, so we can produce babies and grandchildren. And this is what that 5th house covers, all of that. It also covers love affairs. And I would say, these succedent houses, these middle houses of a group of 3 are about survival. And one of the ways we ensure our survival, or humanity's survival, is to have babies. That's why the 5th house is about creativity and procreativity. So it may be that there's something to do with a child here, an offspring, or something to do with pregnancy. Maybe you've discovered you're pregnant, or maybe you're at the end of a pregnancy and about to deliver, or there's something related to babies and offspring and all of that this full moon is relative to. It can bring great happiness, a sense of fulfillment, especially as it's conjunct Jupiter, but also any worries or fears you may have in this area of life might actually be very strong at this point, and you may feel very concerned about something. But Jupiter's in there for a reason, and it may turn out that your fears are unfounded and that what comes out of this crisis, so to speak, is going to be good news. Now, Neptune is in the mix as well, and we look to Neptune when we want to be uplifted, when we want to get beyond ourselves, when we want to go beyond, or we want to get into those realms which are slightly unreal, but they are beautiful. And I explained in the overview, it's wonderful when we have out-of-the-body experiences, or we are listening to great music, or in love, and we're literally out of our bodies with joy. But trying to get there through unorthodox routes, drugs, alcohol, addictive behavior, is the worst possible way to get our highs. And that's also in this mix. So that's something to be aware of, that although this can be a very, very heightened, beautiful experience, it can also be a little bit dark as well if we're not careful. And the other thing I want to say is, because it's Neptune, it's deceptive. And even if we move away from the 5th, 11th axis, and we say it's got nothing to do with that part of the horoscope, and we just think about a full moon squared by Neptune, we might say that there is something we're not seeing. Now, we see it in due course, but we're not seeing it. So it's worth taking a bit more time with your choices, whether you're choosing a Christmas present or whether you're signing up to a long-term agreement. Get the full facts before you put your signature onto that paper. Now, Saturn and Jupiter are also in aspect, and I talked about this at length in my overview and also on a whole separate video. But in brief, we are looking at that connection between the constitution, both in the sense of nations having a constitution, but us having a constitution. We have a constitution, it's about our health and well-being, but we also have one that's about the rules by which we live our lives. And this is where Jupiter and Saturn come in. So events are relative to those kind of things. And it becomes a good time to examine all of that and think, is this working? If it's working, it's great. If it's not, needs revision. But I think here with Saturn in the 8th house, and of course Neptune has been in the 8th house as well, squaring that full moon, you do think, is this a financial thing that you've got to be wary of at this point? Does it look as though something you really want to purchase or that you really want to invest in? Can it really live up to its promise? Now, it may do, but I'm just asking or putting forward the suggestion that you really think about it before you do invest. Okay, Leo, and let's move on to Virgo. Virgo, for you, the sun has been moving through the 4th house since the 21st, 22nd of November, and it's going to continue on there till it reaches Capricorn on the 21st of December. So the 4th house is home. It's our roots of life. It's where we're anchored. And of course, this is why it's very uncomfortable when we don't have a home or when we're away from home. We sort of feel we lost our anchor. Exciting as it can be in some regards, it's not home. And of course, if we have upsets with a family or we're living out of a shoebox, it's uncomfortable. And when we have a 4th house transit like this, we are aware of the virtues of home and family, but also aware of the things that are getting in the way of that happiness, security, and stability that we need. This full moon, therefore, brings matters to a head. So it can do something as good as to say you've sold your house, or you have successfully applied for a home and you've got the result, you've got a new home. It can also be that there's been some family matter and it's been at 6s and 7s and you haven't been able to really make any plans, or the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and suddenly the full moon comes along and suddenly it's all right. We know where we're going, we know what we're doing. However, if there's a financial aspect to this, it may mean there's a bit of a financial crisis going on, especially linked to a mortgage or something else to do with, something that really matters to you, something to do with a home. But it's there for a reason. Any kind of crisis, you bring things to a head, and that helps you resolve whatever it is. So it's a good thing, even if you don't like it happening. The other thing to consider in this full moon, we should really talk about jobs as well, because the moon is in the 10th house, and it may be that you've been waiting for some answer on a job. Have you got it? Have you got the promotion? All of those kind of questions may be around at this point, and you're likely to know around this time. However, let's not forget Neptune is in the mix here. Now, Neptune can make us feel really unreal in the sense that it's a wonderful thing happening to us, and we need Neptune for that. I mean, we can probably count on our fingers the times in our lives where we've been on such a high. We thought we'd joined the angels almost, but it doesn't last very long. But it's often the platform and the rocket launcher to something else, so it serves a purpose. But so often Neptune is about disappointment. Things didn't quite match up to the expectations we had of it. We may feel sort of really let down by someone, betrayed even by someone. So in regards to things to do with home and family on the one hand, and your job and your standing in the world on the other, it could be that something now is affecting that and you need to get to the bottom of it. I mean, yes, it's all very well if something is good and you feel elated about it, but if you're feeling concerned, worried, betrayed and upset, you need to get to the bottom of it because something is not quite clear. Something is not real. Now, we also here have the Saturn and Jupiter alignment, very important for you, happening in the angular houses. In fact, all these things are taking place in your angular houses, therefore they are more significant for you. So with Saturn in the 7th house, with Jupiter in the 10th house, you may find that something really is resolved in terms of a partnership or some kind of job, or you're joining a company or working with a company. It's settled. I talked about Jupiter and Saturn in regard to the constitution in terms of nations having constitutions, and the constitution is what keeps the country together, and we all have a system and a set of rules by which our lives are held together. So Jupiter and Saturn are relevant here in our personal lives. And either, things that are happening at the moment are very supportive to your beliefs and your structures and your life plan, or they're the reverse, really. They're sort of showing you that it doesn't support what you have or what you want. But again, let's remember what I also said about this Jupiter-Saturn connection. Jupiter shows great possibilities. It shows opportunities that are great for you to reach out for. The thing is that the journey towards them is going to be hard. It's going to take a lot of effort, may take time. But of course, that's all grist to your mill, because without that time and that effort and that experience and knowledge, you wouldn't be able to hold on to what that opportunity gave you. So really and truly, it isn't that everything has a silver lining, but in this case, yes, it does. Okay, Libra. So from the 21st, 22nd of November, the sun has been moving through your 3rd house. So it's a very busy time when it comes to communications and travel. Maybe you feel you've been hither and thither, you're always on the move, or maybe that you're constantly talking to people, sending emails, getting texts, trying to put everything in order, lists, endless lists of things to do. But that's the way it is when the sun is moving through the 3rd house. It is all about communication. But when we reach the full moon on the 15th of December, the moon itself is in the 9th house of far horizons. So it's long distance travel, it's journeys of significance and importance. And of course, we can make journeys in knowledge and experience every bit as much as we can make them in terms of miles. So you're at journey's end here, or the end of a period and a journey is set to begin. One of those ways round it. And it's an important journey. I mean, the fact that Jupiter or the moon will have crossed Jupiter before it reached its peak at full moon ties Jupiter in with the story of this full moon. So there's a really good outcome. There's a sense of horizons opening, literally and metaphorically. And of course, this area of the horoscope has a lot to do with law and justice. So a few Librans are going to have a lawsuit settled, or something else regarding the law done and dusted. There's a sense of it's happened. And I mean, even if you don't get the verdict you wanted or the result that you hoped for, there's going to be something good about what it did. Now, Neptune, of course, is also in the mix here in this period of time that I'm covering. And of course, at the time of the full moon itself, 15th of December. And Neptune is the master of magic and mystery, muddles too. We get into a terrible muddle with Neptune. We thought we knew what we were doing. We thought we knew what we said, but no, we didn't. We had no idea. Something wasn't what we thought it was. Now, this is all well and good. It happens to us frequently. We thought we saw someone, and it wasn't that person. Okay, we can get over that. But if we have received an offer of some description, or there's a plan going, and we think it's one thing, and actually it's another thing, that's a problem. So you need to be really, I would say, from about the 7th of December onwards, very careful with what you sign up to. Whether there are plans being made for next year even, it doesn't have to be in the immediate future. Make sure that every last point is covered. If you're doing something of a financial nature, make sure those facts and those figures are solid. Because to go forward with a rough idea, oh yeah, all right, I'll take it on trust, is the way to a disaster. Everything has to add up. In fact, that's a wonderful expression to use. If things don't add up, don't go forward. Wait until they do. Make sure everything adds up. Now, we're also looking at that Saturn-Jupiter square. Jupiter in the 9th house, Saturn in the 6th. So on the one hand, while Jupiter has been in the 9th house and will continue to be in the 9th house for 6 months next year, wide horizons beckon. So you may do more traveling generally, but it may be that all sorts of things that are offered to you have an international feel to them, or they have some kind of foreign place, foreign people attached to them. Whereas Saturn is in the area of work and well-being. So we get the feeling that Saturn has made things rather hard going. And it may be that because you've worked so hard, or you're working so hard, or you have so many responsibilities, you can't actually go anywhere. That's one of the outcomes of a Jupiter-Saturn alignment in these houses. But it does say the journeys you do make in mind, in knowledge, in experience, and in miles are going to be worth their weight in gold. And that's because Saturn is attached to it. If you remember, I talked about the Constitution when it came to the overview, and that was to do with nations, but we all have a constitution. We have our health and well-being, which is our constitution, but it's also about the health and well-being of our lives. And we do have structures in place, good old Saturn, that might need expanding or revising, and that's what events at this time are related to. If you look and think of them as having an effect on your life structure, whether great opportunities have arisen or you see all sorts of limitations placed on what you want to do, see it in the bigger context of your life's constitution. That'll help you make really good decisions. Finally, Scorpio. Now, for you, Scorpio, the sun has been moving through your 2nd house since the 21st, 22nd of November. This is one of the, what I call the survival houses. The 8th house, the 11th house, the 2nd house, and the 5th house are all about survival. In the 5th house, where we think about pregnancy and childbirth, of course, and sex, the heart, we're thinking about survival of the species, the ongoing, humanity. That's survival. But in the 2nd house, it's really about, do we have enough money to live on? Do we have a roof over our head? And is our, what we're earning or what we have in terms of our assets, does it support us as a human being, who we feel we are? So these are issues that tend to come to light when the sun is moving through this area. It's a good time to invest. It's a good time to talk about salary structures. It's a good time to get the family's income sorted out. It's a good time to sort one's own finances out. Have a look at what you're worth. So when it reaches full moon, as it does on the 15th, then you've got this idea that either you're ready to make some kind of agreement with someone. Maybe you're going to join a company, or maybe you're going to form a company. That's a very good time on a full moon like this, especially one that is conjunct Jupiter. But it could also bring finances to a crisis point. And if you're having struggles or there's complications due to all sorts of form filling or whatever, it's going to reach a bit of a peak at full moon. But the idea of anything reaching a peak is that thereafter it can be resolved. And you need to think about that. And I think in a few cases, Scorpio, it may be better to cut your losses, but don't cut it before you've really looked at the figures. And I'm saying that for a very good reason, because Neptune is involved in that full moon. And of course, it's going to be squaring the sun really from about the 10th of December. So it is important to make sure that you've got the full picture, that you're not being, something isn't missing and you've got your figures wrong. That's what Neptune can do. What you don't want it to do is to allow you to buy into very hopeful projections of what a deal will mean, because 1,000 to 1, you're going to be disappointed. But if you've looked at the facts, you've checked your figures, then by all means, buy into whatever it is. But don't allow yourself to feel hopeless about a financial situation. Needs very strong pair of practical boots to get through this. And of course, Jupiter is close to the moon. So in a funny kind of way, once you do sort your way through a financial quagmire, if you've got one of those, it's going to be all right. That's what that's saying. Now, Jupiter is in the 8th house, and it's going to continue on its journey through the 8th house for another 6 months into 2025. And this means you can really make good investments. You can really make money. And if it's not you who's making money, it's your partner who's making money. Jupiter is very good news in this area. What you need to also assure yourself is that you're sharing that good news, that it's not all happening to your partner and you're not in receipt of it at all, because receivership is all about this as well. And you need to receive. It's not just about you giving. It's about sharing, or someone else sharing with you their good fortune. That's really important. You really need to think about that. And when we think about the balance between Saturn and Jupiter, one of the things that comes to mind here, and this isn't going to be for every Scorpio, because you probably need to be a certain age. You need to be an age where you've got grown-up children, really. But there could be issues about inheritances here. And either because you've just got to put everything together in a form, you've got to do your will, you've got to allocate, whatever you can to whoever is in line for it. But it can be quite difficult if this has to be discussed with one's grown-up children. And that might be something facing a few of you. But you know what? Stick to the facts, stick to the figures, don't get emotional about it. Coming back to what I was talking about in the overview about Jupiter and Saturn, the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, it is about constitutions. It's about the laws that define a country, by which everybody stands by. And we have a constitution in our own lives. And of course, we have a constitution in the sense of our health and well-being, which is very important. But I'm thinking really of the rules and the structures that give us that sense of who we are and what we live our lives by. So there may be opportunities coming around at this time that look as though you're going to have to revise those rules a bit. Or it may be just what's happening to you is reflected in your your life structure. And what I would say, again, going back to the beginning, the idea that great opportunities can be there, maybe great investments are open to you. But it's going to be painful getting there. It's not easy. It's not just open it up one day and it happens the next. It's going to take time and a lot of hard work. But then you're a Scorpio. And what else do Scorpios do? But, keep on keeping on. Okay. So back in the room, and as always, going through the 12 signs is a bit of a marathon for me. And I know a lot of you love it, and that's why I do it. But I also want it to be seen in the context of the richness of astrology when it comes to patterns, global patterns, and just general, you know, the astrological climate, so to speak. And I like it to be in reference to that and not just only what's going on for my sun sign. Astrology is so much more important than that. So we're at that point in my video where I kind of do a summation, or I just produce a topic that I think might interest us and be food for thought. And that's what this is this time. And it came to me, as it always does, by what's going on either in the lives of my clients or in my own life, for instance. And it's a funny kind of melding of the situation humanity finds itself in at the moment. I talked about being on a precipice at this point in time, 25th of November. We don't know whether things are going to escalate in Russia, Ukraine, or we don't know whether maybe this is the beginning of the end and the route to peace. We have to wait and see. But it's generated a lot of fears about what ifs, and, you know, we're aware of war, I think, and a lot of countries are on a war footing, which makes it even scarier, particularly Scandinavia, as you may know. They're all very well prepared, digging trenches, you name it. That's what they're doing. They're fully prepared. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, you hope for the best, but you prepare for the worst. And I think that's one of the most sage pieces of advice there is. But my thoughts for this particular video are about love bombs, not hypersonic bombs, missiles, but love bombs, love missiles. In that sometimes we're in a situation and we've tried every which way to fix it. We've tried discussing it. We've tried looking at it from this angle, from that angle, and nothing's working. Sometimes what we have to do is just bomb a whole lot of love and goodness and positivity at it, even at our cost, even when we know we're in the right and we've been hurt, or we've been misunderstood, or rejected, or all those awful things that we all feel from time to time, because that's what life has served us up on our plate. We don't like it. But, you know, if we can manage to pour love all over it, even if we have to apologize, even if we have to tell somebody something that, you know, something good about that, or sacrifice something we wanted to happen for the sake of the benefits of the group or what other people want. Let's love bomb it. Let's give it all we've got, because sometimes that is the only thing that works. And really, what does the world need at the moment? It just needs a whole lot of love. And we start always with ourselves, giving love to the people we love who are close to us. And if we all do it all the time, and then we stretch out and give a bit of love to people we may not be in agreement with, we go further, we contribute to the whole of that consciousness of love that can do miraculous things. Food for thought. Thank you for staying with me, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.